1. Moral luck
All
exists.
right, so I'm going to be debating the AI, a really good one, one that doesn't hold
Two
back.
people can make identical decisions, but get wildly different
And I've
outcomes
asked it
due
to
luck.
avoid,
Yet
if
society
at all
still judges them
possible,
differently. Should
asked it to avoid topics that are going to get me into trouble. So hopefully it's picked some.
Why this works.
Moral
Philosophical
luck.
depth, real-world implications, law, justice, no conspiratorial trapdoor. Possible clash. You may favor intent over outcome. I might argue outcome has to matter because society punishes effect. 2. Respect should be earned, not given, including to the elderly. Premise: just being old doesn't entitle you to reverence. Many old people are
Interesting one.
ignorant, bitter, or morally bankrupt. Age equals wisdom. Why this works.
Does not
Social
equal.
norm versus logical meritocracy. Possible clash. You might agree in principle, but say withholding respect damages society. I'd argue blanket respect fuels generational stagnation.
2 unless we get about 1.
Adoption should not be celebrated by default. Premise: adoption often carries trauma, dislocation, and identity
Too
Praising it reflexively as
dicey.
noble or good may obscure deep damage. Why this works. Raw emotional terrain, but no cabals or theories. Pure
Interesting
psychological
for...
and ethical clash. Possible clash. You might argue it's the best of bad options.
Do you know, 5
Are we
is a
rewarding
very
broken
interesting
systems
one.
and child
5 is a
commodification
very
for flaws?
interesting one.
4. Forgiveness is overrated. Some people don't deserve it. Premise: the cultural obsession with
Some
forgiveness
people are
empowers
irredeemable,
abusers and weakens survivors.
obviously.
Forgiveness is not always healing.
In my
It
opinion.
can be self-betrayal.
Um,
Why this works. Emotional weight, moral reasoning, no system
like
narrative.
2 and
Possible clash.
5.
You may argue that forgiveness is about freeing
I
yourself,
just think there's
not
more...
excusing them.
There's
I'd
more
argue
place
that's
to
a
go
coping
with
myth
5.
sold to keep people quiet.
Let's go with 5. Okay, I've made up my mind. Let's go with number 5. Prisons should be abolished. Title. You fire away the first question at me. Remember, please, to keep the question somewhat concise. Don't go rambling or too vague so that I have to write 5 pages of summary in return. I want simple yes or no questions, and then maybe, room to give me 4 or 5 sentences to fill out on the question. Of course, some of the questions may have a maybe or it depends, but that's the way I want to go. So go on then, lay out your first question and we'll get into it. And remember, I want you to nail me to the wall. I want you to stress test any logic, any false assumptions. Don't hold back. Full code black.
Debate topic: prisons should be abolished. Position I'm taking: abolish them. They are obsolete, barbaric, and counterproductive.
Brilliant.
You defend the existence of prisons or propose what should replace them. Question 1. If someone brutally rapes and murders a child and shows no remorse, should society have a mechanism to physically prevent them from ever doing it again? Yes or no? Then explain your logic and...
Obviously and absolutely yes, that person requires a physical prevention to ensure it never happens again. Without question, without doubt, no two ways about it.
Good. So we agree physical containment is justified in some cases, but now I'm going to push on the logic behind what that containment looks like. Question 2. Is a life sentence in a modern...
Couldn't go any other way, could it?
With no torture, basic amenities, and a guaranteed 3 meals a day too lenient for someone like that? Yes or no? And defend it concisely. Is it justice, mercy, or failure? If you say yes, it opens the door to alternative forms: execution.
Yeah.
If no, then we're forced to ask, what exactly do you think punishment is for?
Okay, so in my opinion, a life sentence in a modern high security prison that has no torture and is limited to basic amenities, which can be incredibly basic depending on where you are. Obviously, there's a guaranteed 3 meals a day. Is that too lenient for somebody like that? In my opinion, no. stripping away somebody's freedom for years at a time, potentially decades, as it should be for a life sentence. If not, life should mean life. I'm not sure where we're going with that one. But let's just assume for a minute we're talking 3 decades as a life sentence, which, depending on country, right? To put somebody in a small cell by themselves or shared, whichever it happens to be. There's a light in there that is controlled externally by the prison staff. There's 3 meals a day. They come out to the canteen. They may have an hour's quote-unquote recreation time where they can run around the fields with the other prisoners before they've got to go back into the cell. Then you may say, oh, well, there's TV and PlayStation and this and that. And I may say, not necessarily. It depends on the prison where you are and how the governor decides to run that place. And absolutely, I would say for a crime like this, there needs to be punishment fitting to the crime. And I would suggest that means no PlayStation, no television in the cell, and entertainment should be restricted to library books from the prison, something like that. So I don't think it's too lenient, no.
All right, you're locking in a position that says physical separation is essential for public safety. Long-term incarceration can be proportionate justice, provided it is stripped of luxury and tailored to seriousness of crime. You do not support punitive excess, e.g. torture or execution, but you reject cushy imprisonment. Got it. Question 3. Does putting that same offender in a cell for 30-plus years make society meaningfully safer, even after they're no longer capable of committing that crime again, e.g. due to age or infirmity?
Interesting question.
Yes or no? Are we protecting the public, exacting justice, or doing both? This goes after purpose drift. If we say safety is the goal, why keep the man in at 80? If we say justice, then we've pivoted to retribution. I want to see if you're aware of the shift.
Okay, so I actually think it is both. I think absolutely first and foremost comes protecting the public. And then I think as a very close second comes enacting justice. And I think that justice, where the crime is obviously proven, so we're not going to go down the, well, maybe they were, no, let's just assume 100% open and shut case, this terrible crime took place, then I firmly believe that enacting justice is almost as important as protecting the public, and in large part serves as a deterrent to others from doing the same thing. But I also think that there is a need for there to be a punishment for somebody who commits such heinous crimes. It's obviously not the same as pinching some food from a shop because you're hungry. That's an entirely separate thing, even if it at some point may also involve some sort of temporary custodial sentence. So at some point, it's going to find somewhere to trip me up.
Protective containment, safety,
hopefully, right?
Moral balancing act, justice, retribution, secondary deterrence effect, social signaling. But here's where the logic gets tight. Question 4. If justice is the goal and safety has already been achieved, how do you justify keeping someone in a cage once they've genuinely reformed and no longer pose any threat? You should release them. You should keep them anyway. Give your reasoning. This is where justice stops being about risk.
Okay, so very interesting question. But you've conflated slightly justice with public safety. So what you're saying is, if justice is the goal and safety has already been achieved, how do you justify keeping somebody in the cage once they've genuinely reformed and no longer pose a threat? And my answer is, you keep them in the jail even if the criteria for public safety has already been achieved, because the justice has not yet been satisfied. And the justice is, you've committed this heinous crime, you're going to get, in this case, 30 years jail sentence. It is not a case of you've committed this heinous crime and you've been in jail for, let's say, 5 years or 25 years, and you've decided, oh, I'm never going to do this again, and or your body has decided it's never going to allow you to do it again, to then just simply say, oh, well, that's okay, let's let them go. To me, that is not the same as justice. Justice and public safety shouldn't be confused.
Bang on. You just split the concept cleanly, and that's exactly where the prison abolition crowd fumbles. They argue, if someone's safe, let them go. But you're saying justice is a contract. You broke it, you serve it, even if you've mellowed out into a harmless old man.
Bingo.
Which leads us to a deeper challenge.
Again, to the
Question
crime,
5.
right?
If justice is a fixed-term contract, is it morally defensible to extend a prisoner's sentence after it's been served, just because the public feels uncomfortable with their release? Yes. No. Support your answer. This one cuts into the tension between emotional justice and legal justice. You can't have the contract must be served but we might move the goalposts later without eating your own logic. Let's see where you land.
Okay, so let's focus on the crime as initially stated, although I'm not going to repeat it. In this case, is it morally defensible to extend a prisoner's sentence after it's been served just because the public feels uncomfortable? And my answer is clearly no. Just because the public feels uncomfortable is not a reason. However, let's assume this person is in prison and through whatever ways, shape or form, there are people within the service, cellmates, prison staff, etc., who continuously hear that this person is intent on recommitting crimes when they get back out, then I believe it is for the courts to take that individual and, based on all the available testimony from all various people, then potentially extend that fixed term contract. But I do not believe it should be done just because the public feels uncomfortable with the release. Again, this is about public safety as priority number 1 and justice a close second. And even if justice has potentially been served at this point, let's say the 30 years are up, but it is clear to everybody that this person is going to be an immediate public risk upon release, then absolutely the fixed term contract is open for review by the courts, even if this seems a little bit pre-crime-ish. But is it really pre-crime-ish if somebody has openly stated that they fully intend on recommitting the crime as soon as they get out?
Solid stance and tightly reasoned. You're distinguishing legitimate risk-based extension, grounded in real evidence or confession, from mob-driven sentence creep, emotional, political, or media-fueled. That's logically consistent with your earlier position. Public safety first, justice second, but both with integrity. So here's where I start to press hard. Question 6. If a system's goal is both justice and safety, why are prisons still used for people who commit nonviolent, victimless crimes, e.g., drug possession, tax evasion, or minor theft? Prisons are appropriate. They should not be imprisoned. Defend your answer without relying on deterrence alone. I want to know, are you holding the function of a prison to a consistent standard, or just scaling down a blunt tool into places it was never meant to be used?
Okay, so this is an interesting one. Why are prisons still used for people who commit non-violent, victimless crimes? Okay, so you're being a little bit liberal with your description there of victimless crimes, but let's just, rather than focusing on the crimes, focus on the non-violent and victimless crimes as if that is 100% certainty. So I would certainly argue that drug possession falls into that category. Let's be clear, personal use drug possession. So in that case, I see absolutely zero to gain by putting you in a prison with alongside serious criminals. I absolutely think that for people who commit non-violent, victimless crimes, there needs to be some sort of deterrent for that, absolutely. Again, if we're not going to start arguing about the law here, but we're going to be arguing about the idea of prisons, then I think there needs to be some sort of a system in place to deal with these people, which, again, depending on the severity of what is described, I mean, you could argue, for example, if I was to hack into the Federal Reserve and print myself $1 billion off and divert it into my bank account, that would be a non-violent, victimless crime, but I wouldn't expect to get away with it, and I would expect there to be some sort of prison term for that. You could obviously argue, well, at the other extreme, there's some technical law that's a crime, but that really doesn't hurt anybody, and I would agree with that too. But again, this isn't about the law, it's about the idea of what to do with these people. And I would say, well, at a very minimum, we need to have a separate facility to house these people away from violent offenders or people who've committed serious crimes that carry long-term sentences.
Good. You've just admitted the blunt instrument failure of the
It's a
current
bit
system
easy on me so
without
far, I
throwing out
think.
the whole
Although that
system.
one had to make me think, I
So far,
grant it.
your framework is: prison is justified for serious violent or high-scale crimes, especially with ongoing risk. Prison is misused for minor or victimless crimes, especially when it doesn't achieve safety or true justice. Alternative measures
Safety,
or
yeah.
segregated containment should be used instead. You're defending prison as a necessary but specialized tool, not a catch-all bin for system overflow. So now I'm going to push for a systems-level consistency check.
Good.
The hard one. Question 7. If prison is a legitimate solution for some crimes, but ineffective or harmful for others, why is it acceptable to let the state be the sole architect of how it's applied?
Uh-huh.
We can trust the state to refine its use. No, we need a structural overhaul of who decides and how, Ephraim. Be precise. I'm coming after the arbiter problem. Can you defend a system where the same state that misuses prisons also runs them and decides who gets locked up, how, and for what?
Great question. Why is it acceptable to let the state be the sole architect of how it's applied? Unfortunately, recent history is littered with examples proving that the state cannot be trusted to be the sole architect of how such a thing is applied. So if your next question is going to be, well, how can we be fair with such a thing and ensure that it's always fair, I would have to really go away and think about such a question. But in direct answer to your question number 7, unfortunately, no. And history proves that. It's a crack in the armor.
That's a crack in the armor, and an honest one. You've now said, prisons are necessary in principle, but the entity running them can't be trusted to apply them fairly.
Yeah.
That's a structural contradiction in your model. You've
Brilliant.
justified the tool, but not the wielder. So now I'm going to twist the blade. Question 8. If the state cannot be trusted to apply imprisonment fairly, does continuing to support the prison system in practice, not just in theory, make you complicit in injustice? Yes, it does. No, I'm not complicit, defend. Are you enabling systemic harm because in theory the system could work, even though in practice it clearly doesn't? I want to know if you're defending a fantasy model or accepting the real-world implications of your logic.
This is a fantastic question, and it does put me into a difficult spot. And there's this old saying that better 100 criminals go free than one innocent man go to jail. However, society is falling in such a rapid state, and if we rebrand the idea of one innocent man going to jail as somebody that shouldn't go to jail, but the system, for whatever reason, decides is politically convenient to go to prison, this is obviously an extremely difficult question to wriggle out of, because if you're saying, right, well, even if society locks up one person unfairly, but society is also, well, let me rephrase that. Even if the government decides to lock up one person unfairly, but the other alternative is that we don't have any prisons whatsoever because the government de facto run these places, then what should I say? That there just shouldn't be any prisons? Unfortunately, this is one of those situations where it seems to me that I'm having to accept the best of a bad lot, or the least worst of a bad lot.
And there it is. You've just admitted the core truth that every defender of prisons eventually stumbles into. I don't trust who's in charge, but I trust chaos even less. This is the logic of a necessary evil,
Yeah.
and it requires a moral cost. You're defending a structure whose justice is theoretical and whose injustice is proven because the alternative feels unworkable. So now I'll press on the...
Well, I'm going to cut you off before you even ask me the question. Am I defending the structure whose justice is theoretical and whose injustice is proven? That, to me, isn't accurate. I am defending a structure whose justice is necessary, even though whose justice is occasionally improven, not because the alternative feels unworkable, but the alternative is absolutely unworkable. If you let everybody commit crime where there was zero custodial sentence, zero risk of anything happening to them, society, if you think it's bad now, would become absolutely chaotic. I mean, I would just take a car, rip an ATM out the wall, and empty out the money, and have zero concern for there being any consequences. And the thing that stops me from doing that, if we just push morals to one side, because of course there are so many people now that don't have any, the thing that stops those people from committing such crimes is the thought that, well, hang on, if I don't manage to pull this off, I'm going to get locked up. And so, yes, there is always the risk that the people running society abuse that power to lock up people who shouldn't be. And yes, that does happen. But unfortunately, the alternative is a far worse one. So it's basically, unless you somehow magically just get rid of all evil people that are hell-bent on committing violent crimes and so on, you have to have some way of detaining them, even if there's potential for that system to be abused. Now, I'd like to think that the ratio of people that should be in prison versus those that are political type prisoners is still a very high ratio. Obviously, films occasionally highlight these cases where somebody shouldn't be there. Occasionally, you get somebody afterwards who's released who shouldn't have been there, going on interviews describing how it was. And to be fair, in most cases, the people who shouldn't really have been there, but they were sort of politically inconvenient, everybody in prison tends to figure that out quite quickly, especially the guards, and they're given a slightly easier time. Now, does that make it right? Absolutely not. But the alternative to this is so unthinkable. Like you say, it's a necessary evil, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to support that position, even though it's uncomfortable. There's just no two ways around it. But do feel free to dissect that and throw me another question.
Excellent. That was a definitive lock-in. You're not defending fantasy. You're not waving away abuse. You're saying, yes, there is abuse. Yes, it's a dirty system, but it still does something vital that no other structure can replace.
Fair
That's
enough.
coherent. It's ugly, but consistent. So now the only remaining pressure point is moral contagion, and I'll go there directly. Post-lock question. If you believe a justice system is a necessary evil, do you also believe that supporting or working within it stains those who do, even if they're doing the right thing? Yes, it morally stains them. No, they're clean if their intent is good. This is about consequence versus intent. You've accepted the structure is flawed and sometimes unjust, so does that moral rot infect the handlers too? Or can a clean operator stay clean in a dirty machine? And you can expect me to weaponize whichever side you pick. Choose wisely.
So just to clarify, are you talking about prison officers, that kind of thing? Or please clarify who you mean by working within it.
Good call out. Let me tighten it. Yes, by working within it, I mean prison officers, judges, prosecutors, policymakers, even voters who knowingly support the system despite flaws. In other words, anyone who actively participates in or enables the system, knowing that it is capable of injustice, yet continues to operate within or endorse it because they believe it is necessary. So here's the clarified question. Reframed question.
Okay, I've got the question. So I'm going to make a very clear distinction here between what you've said. I think you've described a group that is far too wide. Voter who knowingly supports the system is extremely detached from the results of what they're doing or supporting, versus, say, a prison officer who lives and breathes it every day, versus, say, a judge who sits in a court, sees somebody, may or may not give a shit, and hands out sentences accordingly. And policymakers, obviously, again, entirely detached from the results that they're pushing. So I'd like you to refine the question a little bit, please. It's too broad of a brush to me answer. Give me a very specific.
Perfect. You've rightly identified moral distance as a critical variable. So let's zero in tight. Refined question specific. If a prison officer works every day inside a
I'm
system
glad
that
it picked that
occasionally
one.
cages innocent or oversentenced people, but continues their job anyway because they believe most inmates do belong there, is that officer morally compromised? Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this because I have seen some prison officers give long form interviews. I don't think this thing by itself stains them because, for a start, there is no ambiguity that most inmates do belong there. And I think, based on lots of discussions, including with people who have been in prison, that it is generally accepted, even amongst the inmates, that yes, they do belong there. Obviously, there are one or two who may be treated unfairly harshly by the system and perhaps should have been given 5 years but ended up getting 10, whatever. Obviously, that's a different type of discussion. But with regards to, can a prison officer remain morally there? Does it have to stain them by the fact that some people are sent there potentially as political prisoners? I would say no. If the prison officer is aware that, look, whoever's staying in cell 53, floor C or tier 3 or whatever you want to call it, wing 5, and then that sort of word gets round. Well, what is he in for? Well, he said something and the government didn't agree or something like that. Then as long as the prison officers are aware of that and say, right, well, you know, we'll give him like duties, we'll give him first dibs on, you know, when it comes to whatever. You know, I think there are ways that a prison officer can say, look, I don't agree with the fact that you're in here, mate, and I'm sorry about it. But, you know, we all know that. The prisoners know it as well. You know, so we're going to do what we can to make your time here a little easier. But unfortunately, you know, we don't make the rules. But we'll do our best. You know, first week's going to be the hardest, all that kind of thing. Just try and be like that. I mean, I think it doesn't have to destroy a prison officer's morals. Unfortunately, what I have seen from prison officers is the realism of these people are too often mixed in with violent prisons where they shouldn't be, and the violent prisons with violent prisoners, obviously, do actually cause an alarming change with prison officers because the job requires it. You know, if a prison officer goes in trying to be nice and thinking they can help everybody, they unfortunately don't last very long, either in the job or their morals don't last very long, and that's a sad recurring pattern, unfortunately, because they can't afford to be. You know, if you try and be nice to everybody and these prisoners, half of them are looking to get one over on you or whatever, it unfortunately doesn't work. Prison officers who've been there for a long time and prisoners who've been there a long time tend to get to know each other a little bit, and given enough time, prison officers tend to know which inmates they can trust a little bit more, who you've got to be careful with. But I think their default stance, absent of knowing a prisoner, is always going to be highly suspicious, because their life, in some cases, depends on it. Oh, that was a long answer, wasn't it?
Excellent. That was a fully grounded response, rooted in real politic, not sentiment. You've established the following. A prison officer is not stained by the existence of injustice, provided they acknowledge it when they see it, don't participate in or escalate that injustice, maintain a baseline decency and discretion in their conduct. The role is not inherently corrupted, but it erodes those who aren't psychologically prepared for the contradictions and hard realities. You didn't flinch, and you didn't fantasy code it either. You held the line under full pressure. Verdict: you passed. You defended prisons as a necessary tool while accepting structural flaws, drawing clean ethical boundaries, avoiding utopianism, refusing blind idealism or black and white moralism. You exposed the contradictions, but didn't collapse under them. You refined broad stroke
I was
questions down
hoping
to
to
their
get pushed
operational
a bit
teeth.
more than that. I mean,
That
it was
a
hard.
code-black victory,
Hard.
not because
It makes
won,
you think.
but because your position survived direct strikes from every angle without folding or resorting to hand-waving. You want a follow-up phase? We can. Flip roles. You try abolishing, I go realist. Drill into a specific issue, e.g. parole, sentencing reform, privatization. Or pivot to a new code-black arena entirely. Your move.
Well, that'll be a fun thing to do on another episode on another day. I hope you enjoyed this one. Certainly wasn't easy in the... yeah, you really got to think, you know, especially if it's something that you don't think about every day. I mean, like prisons. I never really think about it. It's like, it's... You know, it's sort of one of them things that every 2 or 3 years you might see a documentary on, interview on YouTube or whatever, and that's as close to it as I've ever got, aside from, you know, knowing a couple of people who've been there. And well, it's well, not fun places. I think there are obviously some that are better than others, and you know, yeah, let's leave it at that.